A steady pair of hands. Derek Carlson smiled toward the folding chairs. The finest button pusher this plant ever had. A few people gave the polite laugh the line seemed to ask for. Then Carlson lifted one hand. But let's be honest, Earl was never the man to run a plant like this. The words came out warm, almost fond. Everyone heard the smaller word tucked inside the kind ones, finished. And 13-year-old Nell Doyle, 3 rows back, heard it too. She had put on her good dress to watch her father be honored. Instead, she watched a man in a pressed gray suit hand him a $15 plaque and reduce 31 years to pushing buttons. Earl Doyle accepted the plaque with both hands. "Thank you," he said. He did not correct Carlson. He had already signed papers promising he would leave quietly. What Carlson did not know was that 4 springs earlier, Halbrook had come within 1 hour of sending unsafe water toward 4 schools in half the east side. The new alarms had not existed then, and the old instruments had not warned them soon enough. One man had. The reason was sitting inside the breast pocket of Earl's work coat, written in a worn book Carlson had dismissed as not data. Stay in the room. The people laughing politely for Earl Doyle would not be laughing when that book reached the microphone. For 31 years, Earl Doyle had treated the Halbrook Regional Water Treatment Plant like a living thing. He knew the intake pumps changed pitch when the river carried more silt than the gauges had caught up with. He knew which reading drifted in deep cold. He knew that a clean number could still be late. The official procedures told operators what normally happened. Earl kept notes on what happened when normal stopped applying. He called those pages Series B. Bad weather, fast thaws, farm runoff, cold snaps, anything that made the river behave differently from the chart. He raised Nell much the same way he ran the plant, alone, quietly, without expecting anyone to thank him. Her mother left when Nell was 4. Earl took overnight shifts so he could be home when the school bus came. He slept while she was in class and woke before she returned. He was never the manager. He was the man managers called at 2 in the morning when the screen said one thing and the water was doing another. Then Cardinal Water Partners won the county contract. Derek Carlson arrived with engineering reports, automation schedules, and a number showing how many operators the new system would no longer need. Earl was 54. Nell needed braces, an inhaler, and a roof that did not leak over her bedroom window. The company offered him a full pension, retiree health coverage, and a clean departure. He signed the package at his kitchen table on the morning of the ceremony. His pen stopped above the final line. The clause said he would not disparage the company after leaving. For one breath, Earl imagined standing in front of the board and telling them what 31 years had taught him about systems that promised never to miss anything. Then he saw Nell's inhaler beside the fruit bowl. The speech became smaller. The signature became larger. He signed. Earl had made peace with going quietly. The company had not counted on the young operator he had trained. The send-off was held in the filter hall beneath the tall windows. Plant employees filled the back rows. County officials sat in front. A local reporter waited beside the wall with a notebook closed against her chest. Behind the podium, a bright banner read, "The future of Halbrook water." Carlson ran the ceremony like a product launch. He spoke about efficiency, remote monitoring, redundancy, removing human error from a critical system. Every time he said human error, his eyes moved briefly toward Earl. And Carlson believed what he was saying. 2 counties away, he had once inherited a water system whose emergency knowledge lived almost entirely inside one retiring operator's head. The man died in a grocery store parking lot. Within weeks, a treatment failure forced the county to issue a 9-day boil water advisory. Carlson had spent those days handing bottled water to parents in a school gym. He came away convinced that no town should depend on one irreplaceable man. He was not wrong. He was wrong about what Earl had been trying to leave behind. "We're grateful for operators like Earl," Carlson told the room. Men who kept their hands on the buttons while the rest of the industry learned how to move forward. Another small laugh. Earl looked down at the plaque across his knees. "Come Monday," Carlson continued, "this plant will no longer depend on instinct, memory, or one man deciding he hears something a computer does not." Nell watched her father's jaw tighten, then it went still. She had heard cruelty from children at school. She had never heard it delivered through a microphone as progress. Carlson motioned toward a young operator beside the podium. "Danny Ruiz is our new lead operator. Sharp, degreed, and exactly the kind of talent a modern plant needs." He picked up a printed card. "Danny, say a few words for the man you're replacing." Danny accepted the card. The company's speech was printed beneath its blue logo. Danny Ruiz stepped to the microphone. He was 29. Earl had spent 6 years teaching him what school could teach, and what the river refused to. Danny read the first line silently. He was 4 months into the best job he had ever held. The man who signed his probation review stood 8 feet away, smiling for the officials. Danny turned the card over. He set it face down on the podium. "I'm not going to read this." The polite smiles began disappearing one at a time. Carlson's remained a second longer than the others. "It's a nice speech," Danny said. "It just isn't true." He looked toward Earl. 4 springs ago, the thaw came 3 weeks early. Rain hit frozen ground, and the river changed faster than our intake readings. The source water numbers were climbing, but they were still below the alarm setting we used then. The screen said we had time. We didn't. Danny paused. "I was on shift. I trusted the screen." Earl called from home because he heard the intake pump through the phone. "He asked me what the river looked like, not what the monitor said." Danny walked to Earl's chair. The old work coat was folded over its back. "May I?" Earl gave one small nod. Danny reached into the breast pocket and removed a worn black notebook. He carried it to the podium and set it beside the company's speech. "This is Series B, 31 years of abnormal days. Mr. Carlson called it not data at a meeting last month. I was there." Danny opened the book to a bent page. The handwriting was blocky and dark. "April 17th. Early thaw. Intake pitch dropped before source reading crossed limit. Cut east feed. Run bench sample. Increase coagulant in steps. Hold until filter performance stabilizes." Danny looked up. Earl came in on his day off. He stopped the east feed before the old alarm triggered. 4 schools were on that line. The computer did not fail. It did exactly what it had been configured to do. Earl knew the configuration was too slow for that river on that morning. Nobody was watching the slideshow now. The banner still glowed behind Carlson. The future of Halbrook water. Not one person was reading it. A councilman lowered his coffee without drinking. Carlson's thumb stopped on the presentation clicker. The clerk keeping the district minutes stopped typing. At the back of the hall, ice shifted inside a clear pitcher of water. Paper cups stood beside it in a neat white stack. No one reached for one. A room full of people had come to celebrate the town's water. Now every parent in it was calculating which school their child had attended 4 springs earlier. Rosa Delgado rose from the second row. Her county public health badge caught the light. "I need to confirm part of that." Carlson turned toward her. Rosa did not look at him. "I was the official who prepared the advisory that morning. We had notices drafted for 4 schools and the East Side neighborhoods. We were told the plan had caught the change before finished water left the site." She looked at the open notebook. The incident report never named the operator. It said only that manual intervention prevented distribution. Her eyes moved to Earl. I have wondered for 4 years what manual intervention meant. Now I know who it meant. She sat down. The clerk still had not resumed typing. Earl remained in his chair with his hands folded over the cheap plaque. For most of his life, he had allowed the work to speak for him. For the first time, the right people were listening. Carlson returned to the microphone. His launch voice had lost some of its shine. "What happened 4 years ago matters," he said, "but the new system corrects that weakness. It now alarms earlier and adjusts for rapid source water changes." Danny nodded. "It does. Do you know where the new limits came from?" Carlson did not answer. Danny turned to the final pages of Series B. A second set of dates ran down the margins in blue ink. "Your engineering team digitized these entries last spring. I helped them." They compared Earl's abnormal day notes with 31 years of plant records. Danny pointed toward the control room beyond the glass. "Open the configuration notes for the rapid change alarm. The calibration source is listed there. Doyle log Series B." A whisper moved through the employee rows and stopped. Danny placed one finger on the notebook. "The system is better because his judgment was converted into a procedure. That is what Earl wanted, but you called the source of it a button pusher." Earl rose. He did not look at the board, he looked only at Carlson. "Your system can warn them because I spent 31 years writing down where trouble hides." His hand rested on the worn cover. "I was never trying to make the plant depend on me. I was trying to leave enough behind so it wouldn't." He looked through the glass toward the control room. "That's all I did. I paid attention." Earl sat down. Alma Fisk, chair of the Water District Board, stood in the front row. She turned toward the minutes clerk. "Marilyn, read back Mr. Carlson's description of Mr. Doyle." The clerk found the line. Her voice was flat, precise, and impossible to charm. 11:04 a.m. A steady pair of hands, the finest button pusher this plant ever had. But let's be honest, Earl was never the man to run a plant like this. The laughter from the first time was gone. Nell had now heard the words twice. Alma faced Carlson. "That statement is in the public minutes. Do you want it to remain there?" Carlson looked at Series B, at Rose's county badge, at the untouched water pitcher, then at Earl. "No, then replace it, for the record." For several seconds, Carlson said nothing. When he finally spoke, it was without the presentation smile. "Strike my statement." He drew a breath. "The record should say that Halbrook's operating safeguards were built in large part from Earl Doyle's 31 years of observation. The plant is safer because he preserved what he knew instead of taking it home with him." Carlson looked directly at Earl. "I came here afraid of a system that depended on one man. I mistook the man documenting the solution for the problem." Alma Fisk remained standing. She turned to the other board members. They spoke quietly for less than a minute. Then Alma addressed the clerk. "Enter this as a board directive. The Monday automation cutover may proceed. The current manual safeguards will remain active until the technical review is complete. Staff will incorporate the Series B conditions into the plant's formal operating procedure and training program." She paused. "The procedure will cite its source by name, Earl Doyle." The clerk began typing again. Each key sounded louder than it had before. Alma looked toward Earl. "The completed procedure will return to this board for approval. But the record can be corrected today." She read the directive slowly. "The automation would stay. The human safeguard would stay. The knowledge would no longer live inside one man's head. And the man who had preserved it would no longer be erased from it." From the third row came Nell's voice. "Read his name again." The room turned toward her. Nell stood beside her chair. Her hands were pressed against the front of her good dress. They had made her hear the other words twice. Alma understood. She looked down at the minutes. "Earl Doyle." She read the name again. "Not as a farewell, not as an old operator being thanked for keeping his hand on a button, as the source written into the system that would remain after him. Earl found his daughter's face. He held her gaze until she smiled. Later, outside the filter hall, the reporter asked whether he felt vindicated. Earl shook his head. "I never wanted the plant to need me forever." He looked back through the windows toward the control room. "I wanted the water to be clean tomorrow when I wasn't the one watching it. That was the job." Nell carried Series B to the truck with both hands, as carefully as if the pages were made of glass. Would you have taken the quiet retirement check and gone home, or would you have made them read your name into the record? Tell me below.